Welcome to episode 4 of the From a Certain Point of View podcast. I'm Josh once again,
I'm Adam.
and we are excited once again to be talking the news, reviews, and points of view of Star Wars for this week. And while it wasn't quite as busy of a week in Star Wars as last week was, I don't know how you could top last week. I think we do have a lot still to talk about this week. And I guess the first part is what have we been watching, reading, and playing in Star Wars. So, Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so maybe not as much stuff came out this week, but I think this is kind of the fallout of last week because I've still been mega busy with Star Wars stuff this week.
Yeah, definitely.
I wrapped up Fallen Order on Wednesday night, and I gotta say, I loved that game. I loved every second of it. It was so much fun. And then I've been watching through, we mentioned last week, I started a chronological viewing of Clone Wars, so I'm working on that.
Nice.
Finished up Resistance Reborn, and then I decided to start listening to the Aftermath trilogy again. So I'm about halfway through the first book in that trilogy.
Awesome.
Just kind of a refresher. I've already read through it twice, and now I'm going to listen to the audiobook and just kind of catch up on that because it's been a few years. So
Right. I gotcha.
Yeah, how about you? What have you been doing?
Well, I had this whole in my iPhone and my notes app, I had this whole layout of Star Wars canon that I was going to go through in chronological order and all that good stuff. But then
that's a big
I feel myself in 3 different eras in Star Wars right now. I'm just all over the place, because we got
it's a big chunk.
Fallen Order, which takes place between episode 3 and 4. We've got Resistance Reborn, which is, right before episode 9, and, Mandalorian, which is in between episodes 6 and 7. So, it's
a
that
lot
plan,
no, it's a lot to juggle, and definitely felt myself having to catch my train of thought a couple times, especially working on Fallen Order and then watching Mandalorian, because they kind of they're not the same obviously, but they kind of have a similar feel, I guess. But yeah, so I definitely caught myself having to remind myself that this takes place in this time, and
where are we in the canon timeline? So I think that's important to be cognizant of that while you're consuming all this media. But yeah, I've been reading Resistance Reborn. I'm to about the halfway point. I've been playing Fallen Order, and I just got done with Kashyyyk, and so I also watched Rogue One this past week.
Okay.
And absolutely love Rogue One, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that more when we do our Star Wars rankings.
I think we're gonna probably do that before Rise of Skywalker. That'll probably be a December show.
I'm looking forward to that. And Clone Wars and Rebels, I've been watching just strictly the episodes with the Mando-lore and the Mandalorian backstory, just to get some of that information while I'm watching the Mandalorian and have the backstory in mind. So
getting some Mando-lore in.
Mando-lore, yes, been getting some Mando-lore in there.
Cool.
I like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, loving Star Wars right now.
Nice. So we've got some news articles to cover. We might as well just jump into that, I think, right?
Let's jump into the news.
Well, you want the bad news or the really bad news?
Okay, so our first news article once again comes from StarWarsNewsNet.com, and we have the headline: "The Rise of Skywalker Entertainment Weekly debuts new images and details." So we had our Entertainment Weekly magazine here, which is going into some of the new images from Rise of Skywalker, and I didn't pull any quotes or anything from this one, Adam, but I did see some images that were pretty interesting. Like the one that stood out to me was Poe piloting the Falcon with Chewie and Finn in the cockpit with him, which I thought was pretty neat. I mean, I feel like this has been a long time coming. We know how good of a pilot Poe is, and he hasn't gotten to pilot the Falcon yet. So I think that'll be pretty awesome to see. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a cool image. Like you said, giving Poe the pilot seat, I think, is a good move.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of feels right. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Another image here that stood out to me was we have Rey, and she's on, kind of like the jungle
That jungle
planet,
planet. Yeah, from the
whatever
beginning
planet
of the
that might
trailer.
be. Yeah, and we see
Yeah.
her with her lightsaber, like a red training remote,
Hmm.
and then what looks to be like some kind of blindfold, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, that red
Um,
ribbon in her hand.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that might be a blindfold, maybe,
That was in the trailer
similar.
too. That was right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it might be similar to like Luke putting the blast shield
Sure.
down over his eyes when he was training on the Falcon in A New Hope.
Hmm.
Um, so I love how reminiscent of that it is, and I think there were a lot of people who were kind of had issues with Rey not really being trained and being powerful in the Force, and I think this is going to give fans that needed training, and I do think, of course, she does need to be trained. Um,
Hmm.
in order to be a powerful Force user and everything. So I'm loving what I'm seeing with this.
Yeah, for sure. I never really minded her not having training. I think that the explanation that she was unusually strong in the Force, I think that always kind of stuck with me, I guess.
Yeah.
So that part, like I can see how people get stuck on that because I get stuck on it a little bit with Leia,
Mm-hmm.
but having her just be that kind of anomaly, I guess, is as she's always been described, that was fun for me.
Right. And I think we're going to even dive more into that at the end of this podcast when we
Yeah.
go into our points of view. So we'll definitely talk a bit more about that. Just everything I'm seeing from the Rise of Skywalker so far just excites me. I think there's so many cool things and things that I'm really looking forward to. Another image that stood out to me was we see what I'm thinking is Kajimi, which is the kind of like I don't want to say it's a snowy planet necessarily, but we do see some First Order stormtroopers and some snow troopers as well. It looks like
Hmm.
in this one image, which looks kind of cool. I think we're gonna get like some different stormtrooper classes. We have the Sith troopers, we have like the jet troopers that we saw on the desert planet Pisana, in some of the trailers and everything. And so I think that's kind of cool that we're gonna get to see some different classes of stormtroopers in this movie.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of one thing I think you can look forward to in almost every movie is a new look at stormtroopers. So
Right, definitely. Um, so was there anything else that you saw in that article that jumped out at you, Adam, or anything from?
no, not like I mean, like you said, there were some JJ quotes. Nothing really jumped out, but it was a little resonant for me where he talked about having less reshoots on 9 than he did on 7,
Yeah, because
which
I
is kind
think
of
I think
interesting.
there's.
And we talked about it a little bit last week about how he kind of felt a little more free in 9, and
Yes.
so maybe that kind of piggybacks on that idea as well, so that he didn't feel like, in 7 he felt like he had maybe like a legacy to uphold, and so
Mm-hmm.
trying to nail that and get that perfect.
Yeah.
Where he doesn't really necessarily feel that so much in 9. So I mean, that for me I think it's a good sign.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good sign because I think there are people that are spinning that narrative out there that like episode 9 is in trouble and they're doing all these reshoots
Yeah,
and
there's all kinds of weird things out there around reshoots, around early screenings, people leaving, things like there's all kinds of weird
right,
things
all
out
that
there,
stuff,
and
which I don't think there's much truth to it, to be honest. I mean,
no, I don't
JJ
put much
seems.
stock in those at all.
Yeah, and I mean, JJ seems like he pretty much has it in hand and he's feeling pretty good about it. And like you mentioning, yeah, there were actually less reshoots for this one than The
Right.
Force Awakens. And I think that most films are going to have that reshoot process and that editing process,
Yeah, definitely.
down to the wire of when you release the film. So,
Yeah, definitely. Even Rogue One, which
um,
I know you've talked about a lot,
hmm
possibly even being one of your favorites.
yeah, absolutely.
It's same thing. Reshoots are just a part of the process. And
Yeah, definitely not
as
nothing
far as
to
early
worry about.
screenings, like for me, that's just too early. And I know in the production cycle it's very late for this movie, but
Hmm.
it's just too early to talk about pre-screenings and things of that nature.
Right. And I mean, I know JJ is so secretive and plays things so close to the vest that I would be very surprised if he actually like screened the ending of this movie to people, because then that information would get out and leak out and everything, you know.
Yeah, right.
Um
I mean, anybody who's had a screening of this movie at this point has a vested interest in its success.
right, definitely. Um Ready for the next article?
Yeah.
All right. So our next piece of news is we had a new TV spot, which is about a 30-second spot that was actually released on Star Wars, their YouTube channel.
Right.
So it was kind of an official TV spot they released, and I thought there was a lot of really cool shots. We see kind of, I think we can definitely tell at this point that it's where when they're in that kind of white looking room and Rey has the dagger and
No, yeah,
everything,
right,
it
right.
definitely now looks like Vader's shrine for sure, like the helmet of Vader.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is kind of cool that that's going to come into play in the story. And I would say the one shot that really stood out to me though from this TV spot was Rey leaping from what looked to be like a Star Destroyer onto the Falcon, and
Yeah.
just her taking that large jump and that just for some reason I was like, wow, that is awesome. Like Rey seems to be doing a lot of leaping and making big jumps in this movie.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really cool shot.
Yeah, like, nothing groundbreaking in that TV spot, but definitely some new
Right.
things that are very interesting to take a deeper look at. So yeah, it's a good TV spot. I was excited to see that.
Yeah, and I mean it's always that question of like how much do we want to see before we see the movie, you know, because I think they're
Right.
ramping it up
For
in
me,
terms of putting the TV spots out there, you know.
yeah, for me at this point, I'm good.
Yeah, like I don't know how much more I need to see.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to see the movie for sure. I'm excited about it. So,
Yeah.
but I think for the general movie going population, I think it's good to put those out there to get that
definitely.
population into the seats and everything to see the film. But yeah, I just think, and I even saw like a new TV spot this morning that was out there, and just some just really cool shots. We actually get our first look at the Sith troopers in action. We got a shot of the Knights of Ren on the desert planet Pisana. So a lot of exciting stuff from that TV spot. I don't know if you saw that or not, Adam.
I did not see the one you saw this morning. No.
Yeah, there was just some really cool looking stuff. So I think I'm just really excited, and of course, I want Star Wars to be cool
Yeah.
and to have lots of cool stuff in it, but also having that just kind of, being emotional and on a deeper level, and start having that mythology in it and what makes Star Wars great. So I'm excited.
Yeah, 100%.
And we had one more news article, which was pertaining to the future of Star Wars.
Yeah, it's kind of a big one.
Yeah, and one piece of that, and I have the article from Star Wars Newsnet on here again. The headline was, "Next Star Wars movie announcement might come in January. Could Favreau, Rejwan, or however you say her name, and Filoni head Lucasfilm?" But before we get to that, one quote I have here says, "Sources say Kathleen Kennedy, has a film on deck for 2022, but not the one being developed by Rian Johnson. In that she has a director possibly for that."
Yeah.
So,
and
did you want to talk about this, Adam?
Well, yeah, but just to keep in mind, originally that slot was the one that was slated for Benioff and Weiss.
Benioff and Weiss,
for the
correct.
kickoff of their trilogy.
Right.
So a couple of weeks ago, that's the one that kind of fell apart. And
Mm-hmm.
I know on a recent earnings call, Disney had set some dates for future movies, and it was noticeable that they did not adjust Star Wars dates during that call.
Right.
So now we might be seeing why. They might already have this kind of figured out, and
I think we're definitely going to get a Star Wars movie in 2022.
Yeah, and like I said back then, that was still 3 years away. There's plenty of time to get a quality movie together. So it wasn't really like a crunch time, things fall apart type deal.
Right.
If it was going to fall apart, I think that they moved on it at the right time.
Mm-hmm. So. Definitely. And then it says the Hollywood Reporter, where this came from,
Hmm.
also claims that Jon Favreau could have a big influence over Star Wars creative going forward,
Hmm.
likely due to the positive critical reception of The Mandalorian. And it says a little bit further down here about Kathleen Kennedy and kind of her dream team. Sources say it's likely that Favreau will have a lot of say over the future of Star Wars, and her ideal team includes key roles for Michelle Rejuan. Again, I don't know how to say her name correctly, who is a producer on Episode 9, and Dave Filoni. To me, this is really exciting news if this is true. And
Right.
do you want to speak about this
So
before I do, Adam?
yeah. So some of this comes from Kathleen Kennedy's interview with Rolling Stone magazine this week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Part of one of the bigger, I guess, ideas that came out of that interview was that she was asked about her plans at Lucasfilm beyond her contract expiring in 2021, 2 years from now. And her answer was really, it was a non-committal. It's not a yes, it's not a no. It was basically more of, that's 2 years from now. I don't know what's going to happen at that point, which is fair.
Yeah.
But it's not a definite yes either. So I think some of the speculation about who could be heading Lucasfilm beyond that
Mm-hmm.
it comes from that interview, which I think is
Right.
There's been a lot of talk the last couple of years. So I think before we really get too deep into this, there's been a lot of talk about Kathleen Kennedy and the effectiveness of her leadership and
Yeah, definitely.
things of that nature.
I think some of those arguments are fair and some of them are not fair.
Yeah, some of them are fair, some of them are not. This talk, I want to preface this like this doesn't come from that. This comes from her not saying that she's definitely going to be here in 2 years. So this
Right.
is, for me, this is totally fair speculation.
Yeah. And I know for me, like, for a long time now, I felt that Star Wars Lucasfilm needs and Kathleen Kennedy is a fantastic producer, and she's amazing at what she does. But I've felt for a long time that Star Wars really needs a creative head
Yeah.
of Lucasfilm that really understands the mythology, really understands Star Wars.
Yeah.
And for me, the person that makes sense in that role in some capacity, and maybe not it just being him, is Dave Filoni,
Yeah.
because he's basically the heir apparent to George Lucas. He was basically George Lucas's Padawan, and now has become a Jedi Master.
Yeah, for real. And I think
Yeah.
that's a general consensus among the fan base as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Filoni is kind of
Yeah,
the
he
guy.
just gets it.
Yeah, he does. He's kind of the guy that, like you said, he worked alongside Lucas for a long time, especially on Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically the lore guy,
Yeah, for sure.
being involved not just in Clone Wars but then Rebels, and now he's getting involved in Mandalorian. I found a quote from him earlier this week where he was talking about Baby Yoda.
Yeah.
And he had said that one of the reasons, I have the quote here, one of the reasons I really got interested in this story that John was pitching was the subject of this child. Knowing George and how important the character of Yoda is to him, I wanted to make sure that I could help shepherd this idea.
Right.
That's kind of Filoni,
It is.
And that's what I think the fan base loves about him.
Mm-hmm.
If this type of thing did come true and he had an even bigger role as far as overseeing creative across everything,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. I think that's what people have
No.
been wanting for years.
Yeah, I think people have been kind of clamoring for that, and I think that Lucasfilm is in Disney maybe are starting to listen to the fan base and what they kind of want and what they want to see, and I think this would be a really good move.
Yeah.
If Kathleen Kennedy does step down, for her to have Filoni involved in a bigger way, and Favreau even.
Favreau's interesting to me. I was on a different
Mm-hmm.
podcast this week, and I never quite pegged Favreau as wanting to pigeonhole himself, I guess, into Star Wars.
Yeah,
he seems to like to be involved in a lot of different things.
And
not to say that he can't do that if he were to be one of the three main people at Lucasfilm.
Right.
And I know that he is very excited about working on Star Wars stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just never quite pegged him as wanting to commit totally to that, I guess.
Yeah.
But however, that being said, if he did, I mean that's kind of like the dream. Jon Favreau has done nothing but great things for Disney for the last 10 years, and
Yeah, I mean, he clearly loves Disney and has a great
yeah,
relationship with Disney. So I
I
think,
mean you got to
if
kind
he,
of credit him for kicking off some of the MCU with Iron Man and all that,
oh, for sure,
and then jumping into
for
Jungle
sure.
Book and Lion King and now Mandalorian. I mean, he's done nothing but great things for the company as a whole. So you got to be
Hmm.
excited for that possibility. For me, I just kind of maybe take a little bit more of a wait and see approach with him, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, we'll wait and see what happens with this in the future, and if this is indeed the path that Lucasfilm is going to go on. So.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we move on to our review segment, Adam, I did want to circle back a little bit to if they have a director in mind for this 2022 movie, and this thought just came into my head, like, who do you want to see direct a Star Wars movie? If you had a choice of a director, your dream director for Star Wars, who would it be? I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to Dave Filoni.
okay,
Dave,
ready for
like I said,
Dave to step
that's
up.
yeah, I think so. I
Hmm.
mean, he directed the first episode of Mandalorian, and
Which was great.
yeah, so far it's probably been my favorite episode. I think.
That's a great
And
choice.
yeah, and we'll get into that later, I guess. But
Hmm.
I think it was just the Baby Yoda reveal and all that just kind of blew my mind at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I think it has to be Dave Filoni for me.
Okay, I like that choice.
Do you have a dream choice in mind?
I do. I do, and I recently sat down and once again watched Blade Runner 2049,
Okay.
um, which I think that movie is fantastic. And Denis Villeneuve, who directed that movie, he would be my choice. I think that
Okay.
he would bring something new and fresh and just interesting to Star Wars. And ever since I saw that movie a few years ago, I wanted to see him do a Star Wars movie. So that would be my choice.
Very nice.
Yeah. So are we ready to go into the review segment?
Yeah, let's do it.
My disappointment in your performance cannot be overstated.
Okay, so for reviews this week, we've got three main topics we're going to cover. We're going to save Mandalorian for last because we are going to do that kind of in two parts like we did last week. We're going to talk about the episode in general, and then we'll circle back and do some spoilers. So just so you're aware, there will be spoilers later in this episode. You'll want to skip ahead. We'll put an audio cue up for you so you know exactly when those spoilers are going to happen. But before that, we're going to get into Jedi Fallen Order. We'll cover up through Kashyyyk. Like we said, we're doing a review in progress of that game. And then finally, we're also going to cover a little bit of Resistance Reborn, which is the new book that came out about 2 weeks ago now. We're going to not talk about the whole thing. I know Josh said he's about halfway through that book. But we're going to cover it just a little bit here because it is kind of important leading into Rise of Skywalker. So let's circle back and we're going to start with Jedi Fallen Order. Josh, what do you think? Up through Kashyyyk is where I believe you said you were, so.
Yeah, I just finished my mission on Kashyyyk, and before that, it would have been Zepho, I
Zepho,
think.
yep.
So yeah, I'm definitely loving this game. Just to talk about Zepho a little bit,
Yeah.
I loved the whole aspect of it that was kind of puzzle solving, and with those, I don't know what else to call them, but like big metal balls, basically.
Yeah,
Uh,
force balls.
but and just the whole puzzle aspect of that was really interesting. I love that aspect of it, and I just love the game in general. And then Kashyyyk, I had a little bit of a struggle on Kashyyyk for a bit. There was kind of a long period of time between save points,
Okay.
and some challenging enemies in between those save points. So I still learning the combat, and I'm not the best gamer out there, so it
Right,
takes me
right.
a little bit. But getting past that frustration and finally getting past those enemies was pretty rewarding, and I just love the tie-ins to like, you know, spoiler warning, if you haven't played the game yet, like Saw Gerrera and
Right.
that whole thing, and kind of like having the Imperial like K2 type droid in there, and those sort of
Yeah.
the tie-ins to Rogue One and stuff. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, so let's kind of go back and do that point by point. So the first thing you brought up was really the dungeon style aspect of
Hmm.
Zepho, which does come back into play later, and it's one of
That's
the
good
things
because
I
it went away a
mentioned.
little bit on Kashyyyk, and that was like I love that element of
Yeah,
it. You know.
and it's one of the things I mentioned last week. One of my favorite games of all time is Zelda, and pretty much any Zelda game in that series, I guess.
Hmm.
So I love dungeons and puzzle solving because of that reason.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
one of the game types that this combines is that type of dungeon style puzzle solving mechanic. And to get through Zepho, that was a main focus of that whole planet. Was to get through the
Hmm.
Jedi Temple, and to do that, like you said, you had those giant metal balls, and you were moving those around to get them to the right spot. There was also some force aspects where you'd have to solve certain puzzles by using force abilities. I love that aspect of this game.
Yeah, me too. That's probably my favorite thing about it so far.
Hmm.
Um, was that aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, and then another point that you kind of touched on was safe spots, and then I think also the map, which I think if I had one main complaint, the map is a little difficult sometimes, and I'm talking specifically
Yeah.
about when BD1 shows you the map. It's
Hmm.
sometimes a little difficult to decipher, especially when you're looking at different levels and how one area connects to another area.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a struggle for me.
Yeah, so that I can definitely understand. It's a little tough to read sometimes,
Hmm.
and sometimes I just kind of found myself guessing about which path would take me to which area that I needed to get back to.
Right.
But that only really happened a couple times for me. Kashyyyk was one area that happened, and I think it might have been Zepho.
Yeah, well, I found it
Uh,
interesting too, and you might have touched on this a bit last week, Adam, but like at the end of my Kashyyyk mission, basically my next mission is to go back to Zepho,
hmm
which I think is kind of cool. Like I'll be traveling back to that planet and have another
Yeah,
mission there, and so I think that's kind of
yeah. It tends to do that a lot, where you're traveling back and forth to
hmm
planets that you've already been to, which is great because you'll unlock new things as you go back.
right.
You'll be able to take new paths that you couldn't before.
hmm I
So
think my next move before I go back to Zepho though is definitely to go to Dathomir and get my double bladed lightsaber.
I think you'll have to wait for a little bit on that one.
Will it be too challenging?
It is it's once you get it, it's I didn't go back to a single bladed lightsaber after I got it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I probably won't be able to go back either.
Yeah. And then save points is something else I want to touch on.
Hmm.
You're not the first person that I've heard say that about save points, because
Right.
it's not a typical game that we might be used to in the recent past, where
Hmm.
a lot of games are going to be saving for you as you go, and you don't really have to worry about managing save points so much.
Right.
I don't know for me if it's just because I've played a lot of Metroid style games,
Hmm.
because this, like we said, this is a Zelda style with dungeons, but then the map is very Metroid, and I don't know if you've played any of those games, Josh.
I have not. No.
Okay, so Metroid games kind of follow the same formula, where you have a large map and then you're unlocking certain areas of the map as you progress through the game, depending on the different abilities that you recover as you go.
Hmm.
So that style of map progression is almost it's a one for one Metroid. I don't want to say copy, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
And so is the save point. So in Metroid, you come across different rooms that are save rooms where you can plug into a computer and save your game at that point.
Hmm.
So not, and then beyond Metroid, there's been a whole style of game called Metroidvania, which is like a 2D side-scrolling type thing
Right.
that is all very reminiscent of Metroid. And those games kind of use the same mechanics, where you have the save rooms and the map is locked at the beginning until you recover abilities and things of that nature. So it's very Metroid. And I read someone this past week that said that Jedi Fallen Order is the best Metroid game in the last decade, which is, it really is. It's the
Right.
same type of thing. So I guess back to the save points. Like, I guess that's just something that I've been used to, since that's a style of game
Sure.
that I've played a good bit recently.
Yeah, and I think I only experienced frustration with it on Kashyyyk so far, just because I felt like there was this one portion of that mission that I had to play several times over, because I would get killed and then I'd go back and then have to start all over again. So that was a little frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, for this, the game for me is still right, and as I'm in progress right now, a 9 out of 10 game for me. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
That would be my only minor complaint, would be just that my limitations in combat lead to my demise, and then kind of restarting if I didn't save it. So
yeah, so for
that's
me,
my
definitely still a high scale, like
Yeah.
9 out of 10 at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have only gotten screwed twice with save points, I think.
Yeah.
It happened one time at the very beginning, and that kind of learnt me real quick,
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it happened once later in the game, but that was and that was actually my own fault at that point. I just didn't save when I should have. So
Right.
But yeah, and that's another Metroid thing, like learning to manage save points, which you'll learn as you go.
Yeah, definitely.
And they always seem to circle back. So for me, it never really felt like I was going too long without a save point. Because usually once you unlock a path, it's going to circle back to a save point. Any other thoughts on Fallen Order before we wrap up this part of our review?
No, overall, I just love the game, and it's definitely the Star Wars game I was waiting for, because I'm all about single player story based games. That's my bread and butter, versus like the online multiplayer stuff. I like playing those games, but I'm, again, just not a great gamer. So for me, like, being able to do a single player game with a story, and I'm just loving it.
Yeah, great. Why don't you start off on Resistance Reborn? Because I know you said you're about halfway through, and I don't quite remember where everything falls. So I don't want to get too far ahead of you.
I'm about halfway through, and I'll try to avoid getting into any like major spoilers or anything if anybody out there hasn't read it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, my overall feeling on it is I like it. I'm enjoying it. To be honest, I don't love it. I feel like at times it feels like a kind of a greatest hits of canon to me, where it's like, which is a good thing on one hand, where you're pulling together all the canon novels that have come before it and characters from those novels, and kind of pulling it all together. But sometimes I think it comes at the expense of really having kind of a new story there, pushing the story forward. That would be my critique of it. But I do like the fact that, we're getting all of these characters and all of these things coming together and tying the canon together, which I think, while at times it can be a weakness, I think it can also be a strength of this novel so far. And I'm at the point where, like, all the characters are starting to gather on Ryloth.
Okay.
And sort of come together, which for me, I feel like it's getting more interesting and getting more exciting. I've been enjoying like the return of Wedge's character and like Poe's storyline in particular, and him kind of dealing with the failures of the Last Jedi
character in this by far. This is Poe's story.
Yeah, so I'm loving Poe's story, and I think it's really dealing with the choices he made in The Last Jedi and how that's affecting him going forward. So that's my standout, and those are my overall impressions of this one so far.
Okay, great. So I actually have been loving Resistance Reborn.
Good.
Yeah,
glad to hear that.
And it's maybe not my favorite canon book,
right?
But I do love it, and I would actually go so far to say, I know people cringe when they hear this, but I would actually go so far to say this is probably required reading going into Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those ones that you got to pick up if you want a little bit more going into episode 9.
Yeah, and not even just going into episode 9, but like Poe is very transformative as far as his character goes in here. Like you said, he has to deal with a lot of the decisions he made with leading the leading the mutiny
Mm-hmm.
and getting some people killed at the beginning with the
With the bombing run, right?
run. He has to deal with that a lot in this, and he comes to terms with a lot of things that he did during Last Jedi, and this is his growing. I don't want to say growing up. He grows in this story, and he moves past a lot of that stuff. So I think that in Rise of Skywalker, we're going to see a very different Poe. We're going to see a Poe that's kind of come into his role as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And that transformation, I think, might be a little, I don't want to say jarring. That transition might be a little bit much in between movies for people that haven't read this book.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Adam, is his transformation will be a lot more believable and earned if you read the story. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of his growth comes in this book in between
Yeah.
these two movies, obviously without having seen Rise of Skywalker at this point.
And for me, Poe coming into a leadership role is something I've been looking forward to since The Force Awakens. So, um, I'm definitely excited about that. And of course, I have to take into consideration that my review in progress here on this is coming with me only having read half of it. So,
Yeah.
I might feel differently, once I get to the end.
I don't think you will.
Right.
I think you'll still like it, but just knowing how it ends, like I think you'll still like it. I don't think you'll fall in love with it after
Right.
the halfway point.
Right.
But then also not just Poe's story. This is where the Resistance comes together.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen these big shots in the trailer of all these different ships and all this support that the Resistance now has, which at the end of Last Jedi they don't. It's one ship.
Right.
It's the Falcon and those four.
So it's like, how did they
people.
get all these people together, and
I
how
imagine
did they rally all these?
Yeah, and I imagine
troops?
you're going to see some of that, but a lot of the stuff that you read about in Resistance Reborn goes back to the call that was put out at the end of Last Jedi, for support across the galaxy, which obviously didn't come.
Yeah, and I get the feeling that this, and I haven't really gotten into it yet, but that that's going to be explained, like why they didn't answer the call, and like the First Order might be behind something that was going on there, why they didn't respond to that.
Yeah, and then the novel itself here deals with the fallout of that and how they rectify that, and I think that's pretty important. That's another one of those things that's going to be a lot more. It's going to be a much easier transition between movies, having known the story that happens in Resistance Reborn.
Yeah, like for me, like this reminds me of leading up to Rogue One when I read Catalyst, and
Yeah.
I loved Catalyst, and I felt like it was such a great lead into Rogue One. If you read Catalyst, you get a lot more out of Rogue One, which I did. And I think this is kind of a similar scenario.
Yeah, and the last point, and I don't think this is a spoiler for you. It's a very minor spoiler for other people. But
yeah, it's fine.
Leia in Resistance Reborn, we see that she's not healed at all.
Right, she's still kind of recovering from her injuries and everything.
And not only recovering, she's actually not doing that great.
Not doing good, yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah, that's the impression I got as well. So so there is definitely some
I don't
fallout of her being in space.
Yeah, and Last Jedi almost gives the impression that maybe she's actually healing from that stuff.
Right.
But in Resistance Reborn, we definitely see that she's actually not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might be a pretty important piece of Rise of Skywalker that's going to come back into play.
Yeah, and it leads me to believe that while initially I thought maybe she wouldn't die in Episode 9, now I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that she might.
It definitely seems to be foreshadowing that event.
Right.
So
we'll see.
So yeah, for me, I have been loving Resistance Reborn. I would call this, like I said before, required reading. If you really want to know what's happening in between these movies, if you really want to get the most out of Rise of Skywalker, I think you need to check out this book.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading Aftermath before picking this up.
Okay.
And having a hard time getting through that. Especially that first.
We'll have to talk about that sometime. I mean, Aftermath, it's different.
we'll come back to that. But Resistance Reborn for me, even though it's not like my favorite so far, I still really am enjoying it. It's a much quicker read for me. Like I'm more interested in this and invested in it, and like it's definitely going by quick for me because I'm a slow reader. But I'm definitely enjoying it. So
cool. And now the big one, Mandalorian, Chapter 3. Josh, what did you think of Chapter 3?
My overall feelings on Chapter 3, I feel it's right up there with the first episode for me, which because I loved the first chapter of The Mandalorian. And I thought episode 3 was great. I think it really expanded on the world that we're in with the bounty hunters and with the guild and with the Mandalorian culture. And I think, I just love the dynamics and the interactions between the Mando and spoiler warning, I guess, baby Yoda. And so I love this episode, and I'm still every week just wanting to see what happens next. I hate when each episode ends, because they are a little bit on the short side, which I complained about last week, and I'll continue to have a small issue with, just because I want more of it, and I'm always wanting, when I get to the end of it, I'm always wanting more, which I think is a credit to what they've created here.
Yeah, definitely. I think my feelings are pretty much the same. I love this episode, the same as I loved episode 1 and 2. It's hard for me, like I said, I think maybe earlier, like I had said, I think maybe the first episode is maybe my favorite so far.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like picking your favorite kid. I mean,
right. I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really good. I loved episode 2. I thought episode 2 was just a really fun ride. I love the Jawas, and I love the whole the Baby Yoda reveal, how strong he is in the Force. I love it.
I definitely loved it too.
Yeah, there wasn't.
It was like a side mission kind of thing, but I still enjoyed it.
Yeah, but episode 3, you get into a lot of some answers in this episode, which felt pretty good. But then there's also a lot more questions, so there's a lot more stuff to cover.
It's doing a good job of answering and asking more questions. I think if I and I know we talked about last week whether or not we were going to give kind of point values or anything to these reviews, and I think it can be fun to do that. So if I had to give a score to these episodes so far, I would say the first episode for me was a 9 out of 10. The second for me was an 8. Even though I loved it, I thought it was kind of like the side mission aspect of it. And this chapter 3 for me would be back up there to a 9 again.
Yeah, I don't want to make this too easy, but for me, like I said last week, this is maybe my favorite Star Wars thing of all time. They're 9s across the board for me.
All right.
Okay, so like we said before, we're going to do a spoiler discussion now. We've done our general thoughts on this episode so far. If you don't want spoilers, it's now time to skip ahead. Okay, Josh. Spoiler time.
All right.
Mandalorian Chapter 3 is called The Sin. What do you think about that title? Let's just start with there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering. What does this title mean, The Sin? Because the first chapter was just chapter 1. Then we had the child, and now we have The Sin.
Right.
And for me, I feel like, from my perspective, from my point of view, the sin is just like kind of the sins committed against this child. This child being innocent, obviously, and being used for some purpose that we don't know yet, and just kind of being experimented on. And I think that is the sin for me. But what are your thoughts on the title?
I think it's twofold. I think it's like you said, with the Empire, once with Baby Yoda. I think that's part of the sin, because and we'll get into this a little bit more later. We do kind of hear a little bit about what they want with the child,
right?
But then I think the sin also deals with what Mando decided to do, where he, really broke his code. He broke what
Mm-hmm.
what his vows to the guild would have been, I guess. Maybe
Yeah, he
vows is a
goes
strong
completely
word.
rogue here.
Yeah. I
I
think
like
that
your
has
point
to
of view
deal
on the
with
title.
I think that has to deal with the title a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the beginning of the episode. Then we catch up with him leaving Arvala 7, and he's flying back to deliver the bounty. So on the way, he gets a call from Grief Karga, and Grief says, I don't know what the client wants so bad with this baby with this package. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know it's a baby. I don't believe. He doesn't know if he wants to eat him or hang him on his wall.
Yeah, he's not sure,
But
and
Grief is pretty happy.
yeah, he's obviously happy that the bounty's being brought in.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I wanted to touch on here with
Yes.
I love I just these little things that pop up in this show that are so Star Wars that I love. I just love the hologram popping up in the spaceship and
Yeah.
Grief talking to him. Just that little thing, just that little Star Wars moment in there. And then just the scenes with Baby Yoda on the ship, him once again climbing out of that. What were we calling that? That you had a name for that
Repulsor crib.
repulsor crib,
Yeah.
and just climbing out of there again and playing with the knob on that lever
Yeah.
in the ship. But
Yeah, you can
at
see
first
he
I thought
loves that
Baby
knob.
Yoda was going to jump to light speed, but
yeah, he
that
loves
was
that
just
knob, and that's a
yeah.
great scene
Yeah.
because Mando tells him that's not a toy. He picks him up and puts him back in his repulsor crib,
Right.
which is
I
important
just
later,
love it.
and we're going to cover that later. But that kind of starts to maybe see a shift in Mando's outlook on things right there.
Mm-hmm. For
We
sure.
can kind of see how he feels at the beginning of this episode, and then we'll revisit that in a little bit here.
Yeah, I think that moment when he kind of lifts him up
Mm-hmm.
and puts him back in the repulsor crib, like I feel like, oh, I don't know if I like the way that he's picking him up. Is he sort of because I felt like they had this connection and he was really caring and loving towards Baby Yoda, and then the way that he just kind of put him back in there, I was like, oh, is he trying to distance himself emotionally at this point now, and because he knows he's gonna
a bit of both,
turn the bounty in and give him up,
Yeah, I think on Arvala he started to have those sorts of feelings, and he was trying to come to terms with that. And definitely at the beginning of episode 3, he's still kind of fighting those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think he does at this point have some connection with the child.
Right. Now, Adam, you also mentioned the planet name.
Arvala 7.
Did you say Arvala 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do want to briefly touch on that.
And that was
okay.
just to make sure that everything's clear. That's the Tatooine style looking planet where he meets Kuil.
Right. So I really wanted that to be Tatooine. So I'm I thought about doing kind of a blog post on this where I'm a little bit grumpy, just about where is Tatooine? Where are our familiar planets? Like my thinking is, if a planet feels so much and looks so much like an original planet that we knew and loved, why don't we just call it that planet? Why don't we just use that planet? And I think that's kind of like a little disappointing for me.
I'm with you on that. For me, it's a little pointless. Like I believe we talked about this a little bit last week, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
I know we want to fill out the galaxy and
yes,
make it seem like a big place with lots of planets and lots of possibilities and things of that nature.
Right.
But like you said, if we have a planet that looks like Tatooine, that feels like Tatooine, that's inhabited,
it's got Jawas, it's got a sandcrawler,
it's Tatooine. Just make it Tatooine.
That's my only point.
Goes back to one of my main complaints with the sequel trilogy so far, has been kind of the lack of different ecosystems on planets.
Mm-hmm.
We've had snow or salt, whatever. We've had
desert,
jungle,
forest,
jungle and desert.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like we're getting that again in 9. If we have these desert planets, and I get that there's not going to be just one desert planet in a galaxy that large.
Right.
But some of it just feels like we're using the same type of ecosystems and just putting a different name on it, I guess.
Yeah, so just, I'm all about, using different planets and expanding the
Yeah.
galaxy and everything. But every once in a while, I wouldn't mind visiting one of our familiar planets. And like I thought episode 9 would be a great opportunity to do that with the Death Star remains being on Endor, but then we found out it was one of the moons, maybe an ocean moon,
hmm
Kefbur or whatever the name
Yeah.
of that is. And
Yeah.
then with this in the Mandalorian, I thought, oh, that's Tatooine, but no, it's not. So I don't know if like George Lucas gets some royalties or something for
Yeah, I don't
using
think
things that
so.
he came up
Yeah, I
with, and
don't
maybe
know.
that's part of this. I don't know if I'm looking too deep into it, but um, you know,
Yeah, I don't think it's that, but I really don't understand the aversion to using Tatooine or other planets like that.
right. But anyway,
So
getting back to the point after that little diversion.
we go back to our unnamed planet, and this is where the bounty hunting guild seems to be centered, and also where the Mandalorian armory is hiding out. But the Mandalorian delivers the bounty to the client, and we find out the client has given out multiple fobs for this bounty. So all of the different bounty hunters that we ran across on our Vala were all sent there by the client.
Yeah, it actually came from the client. I wasn't sure if they all came from the client or not, but we seem to have got that answer.
Yeah, we got that answer. The Mandalorian starts showing some attachment here to the child because after delivering the child, he starts to ask about what's going to happen to it,
Hmm.
which is interesting. And he kind of gets put in his place by the client. It says, according to your guild, you should be forgetting about this now. And
Yeah, payment should be enough for you to just take your payment and go and move on, basically.
Yeah, and speaking of payment, he gets a ton of Beskar steel.
Indeed, enough for kind
He,
of full armor, basically.
yeah, he got one plate before, and he got a ton of plates this time. So he
Hmm.
has enough for a set of armor, and then some. Plenty left over for the foundlings. So speaking of that new armor, he goes back to the armory. The armorer will forge him a new set, and she says that this will draw many eyes, and that kind of brings in a group of other Mandalorians to challenge him at that point.
Right.
And he gets into a little spat, which I kind of enjoyed, a little spat with another Mandalorian.
Hmm.
And we see some vibra blades, which is what he used to kill the Mudhorn on Arvala.
Right.
We see the vibra blades, which have been a part of Star Wars and Legends lore for a while. So it's cool to see those in action. Kind of cool to see them on screen now.
Yeah, definitely cool to see them incorporating that kind of stuff.
But then again, during the forging scenes, it's kind of neat how they're using the forging scenes to go back and tell the Mando's backstory.
Yeah, these forging scenes kind of elicit these flashbacks.
Yeah, and it's almost like they're not just forging. We're not seeing the forging of the armor. We're kind of seeing how the Mandalorian was forged along the way. So it's kind of a neat little parallel there, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So this new glimpse into his past shows him as a young child again, but this time his village is getting torn apart by B2 super battle droids.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear at this point this is the Clone Wars time period.
Yeah, I love seeing them again. I love that tie into the Clone Wars.
Hmm.
And we also see that it appears that the death of his parents came from one of these B2 battle droids, which could explain his general dislike for droids.
Yeah, it definitely explains that and the reasoning behind that. And again, we see that he was kind of in a way orphaned, after
Right.
his parents died, and again, making that connection to Baby Yoda more meaningful and everything.
Yeah. So our next scene is back in the cantina. He visits Grief Karga again. He's looking for some more work. Grief kind of scoffs at him and tells him, take a day off. I'll take you to see some Twi'leks. And but again, the Mandalorian is asking about the fate of the child. So we're seeing he's wanting some answers here, and he's not getting them. But he does get a new bounty to go to the ocean dunes of Karlak, which is interesting. That was actually a planet that was visited in the Clone Wars. It's a cold planet.
Okay, it sounded familiar, but I wasn't sure where I heard that before.
Yeah, so he gets his next bounty, but he goes to leave. He gets in his ship, and I love this knob thing and how this kind of is the catalyst to get him to go back. But the little knob that the child baby Yoda wanted at the beginning, he goes to flip that lever, and that's what gets him to kind of stop and think about this again.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it just had that little meaningful
Mhm.
connection that reminded him of, Baby Yoda and everything.
Yeah, so he shuts everything off, heads back to the client's hole in the wall room, apartment, complex type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts doing some recon work, and he overhears a conversation between the client and Dr. Pershing, which has some interesting story elements here. Apparently, the Empire wants this child for reasons, and the client tells Dr. Pershing that we need to, quote unquote, extract the necessary materials, and that he can no longer protect the doctor anymore.
Yeah, for me, this was the most interesting part of the episode. Just
hmm
talking about extracting materials,
hmm
and what that might mean, and whether
hmm
that's, whatever gives, Baby Yoda or the species long life, or maybe it's, you know,
Yeah.
midichlorians, whatever it might be that they're extracting, I think is very interesting. And where is that going to go?
Yeah. So that's about all that Mandalorian needs to hear. This basically sends him into John Wick mode.
Right, and I think he realizes that at this point, if he doesn't step in, this child is going to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there were a lot of aspects of this episode that were very predictable,
Sure.
but I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I
No.
think these things were predictable in the best way possible, because
Yeah.
you had this feeling, okay, he's going to bring him in, he's going to get new armor. We were kind of talking it out as we were watching the episode, like, he's going to get
Right.
new armor, he's going to go back there and kick some butt and
Yeah.
get
And
Baby Yoda back, and
it
then
builds your suspense, but then it kind of gives you that instant gratification.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, like we said, he goes John Wick style
Oh, John Wick style for
into
sure, and
that
I loved it.
complex, and he just totally blows the place up. So,
Hmm.
and we get to see everything. Well, maybe not everything, but we get to see a lot of the tools that he has in his repertoire.
Yeah, pretty much every way he could use his weapons, we got to see that,
That
which was really cool.
we got to see the flamethrower a couple times. That toasted stormtrooper was a pretty intense scene.
Hmm.
We get to see his armor upgrades, and you have to remind me of the name of these things. The whistling. I
Yeah,
can't
like the
think of it.
whistling birds or something like that.
Something like that. But
Yeah.
those take out a group of four or five stormtroopers all at once.
Hmm.
We get to see
Yeah, it
a
was kind
lot
of
of
reminiscent of Iron Man type stuff.
yeah, the same type of thing. So yeah, he goes in and he gets the child and makes his way back out. But then on his way back to his ship to leave, we see that the guild has activated a bounty on him.
Right.
So we get to this really cool, almost Western movie style standoff at the end,
Standoff, yeah.
with the entire town is just there, all pointing guns at him, and
Hmm.
he's on his way out, and Grief Karga is there as well, kind of leading the opposition against him. Tells him to leave the kid, and we'll work this out from here. But Mandalorian has other ideas. So he starts to shoot off and does pretty well. We see the flamethrower again. He's able to fight off a lot of these bounty hunters. But then it gets to a point where he just can't. He's overwhelmed. There's no way
Yeah.
out. He's gonna die.
Hmm.
But then the Mandalorians save the day.
The other Mandos show up. We got some jetpack action. We got
Yeah.
very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, great scene. They come out of hiding. which it's going to have some ramifications for them.
Yeah, that'll
as a
have
whole.
some implications too, I'm sure. Yeah.
They're going to have to relocate now, so we're going to probably see them on a different planet.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would assume so.
Yeah, we'll catch up with them later. But they come save the day. Like you said, we see everything from jetpacks to rockets to everything else. And Mandalorian is able to get back on his ship, where he has another run-in with Grief Karga, and shoots him in the chest, but happens to shoot him right where Grief was hiding his finder's fee from the Beskar.
Yeah, for a second there, I thought, oh man, we're losing another what was supposed to be a major character right off the bat here. But then we see the reveal of the Beskar steel, which so we're gonna get some more.
Which I totally
grief.
missed. I gotta understand. I gotta come clean here. I totally missed that. That was He shows that Beskar earlier in the cantina.
Yes, he does.
Where he says that he is rich too.
Yep.
And I watched this episode twice, and I don't know if I just wasn't in the right frame of mind, but I missed that twice.
Yeah. I I didn't at the time that he got shot. I didn't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember seeing him reveal it. It didn't click at that moment. I was like, oh my goodness, Grief's gone now too. But yeah, that wasn't the case.
Yeah. And we get one more little scene, which I love this scene. But the child is there, Baby Yoda's there, and he reaches up for this knob again.
This moment is priceless right here.
And this time, this is where we see the Mandalorian's kind of progression through this one episode. Because before, that wasn't a toy.
And he put it back on.
He screwed it back on, but now he unscrews that knob and
willingly hands
to
it
the
to
child.
him.
It's now a toy.
Yeah.
Just a wonderful little moment there, and great.
It's amazing character growth within just a span of 37 minutes.
Great use of that little prop.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We see at the beginning that the child really wants that, and that's a toy to him, but Mandalorian's kind of standoffish at that point, and that totally changes at the end.
Yeah.
So that covers Mandalorian Chapter 3. Have anything else you want to add before we head on here?
Yeah, I do. I just, for me, like, I didn't know really what to expect from the Mandalorian going in to this whole series. And it very well could have been just like this bounty hunter story where we had these cool missions every week. You could do a thing where it was just bounty after bounty and it just being cool stuff and cool looking. But it went well beyond that. And the driving force behind this story is this child, Baby Yoda, the child, and that's the connection that the audience forms, and that's what's driving the story forward. And I think that was such an interesting and a good choice to push the story forward that way, where it could have been something different. So that's what I love about it.
Great.
So we're getting a little bit more than just surface level cool bounty hunter stuff. We're getting like a deeper story,
I would agree.
Deeper connection.
That was probably my first fear hearing about the Mandalorian was it was going to be a bounty hunter shootout show, which didn't sound familiar. It didn't sound too intriguing.
It can only take you so far.
Yeah,
you can only go so far with that.
Bounty hunters got a lot of attention after episode 2 with Django and that. We had the video games and we had all that stuff, but for me, bounty hunters have just kind of been cool side characters. I wasn't very interested in checking them out any deeper than we already had, I guess.
Yeah, same here, absolutely. And this show has kind of
been pleasantly surprised with the depth that we've seen in this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's much deeper than I thought it would be, and it's what's keeping me coming back for more and loving it. So
yeah, definitely same for me.
All right, sir. So are you ready to go into our final segment, our points of view?
Yep, let's do it.
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Okay, Adam. So for our points of view today, there's something that's been on my mind for a while that I just wanted to get out. And the article that Rolling Stone did in their interview with J.J. Abrams really brought this to the forefront of my mind. And in the interview, they were talking about like fan criticism about Rey's kind of giftedness in the Force without training, and how she was able to learn things faster than typical. And you touched on this a little bit earlier in our talk today. And JJ's kind of response to this criticism and about her, just her strength in the Force, his quote was, "Yeah, it's spooky, right? It's a fair point. It's not an accident." Do you want to talk first about your point of view on this, and then I can kind of give you mine?
Yeah, sure. So, for me, all along, I feel like she has some type of connection somewhere. I don't know what that connection is. But the explanation we were given in The Last Jedi, I don't think is the full explanation. I think that was a partial vision that Kylo had, kind of like Rey's partial vision that Kylo would eventually turn. And we saw
Mm-hmm.
that he did turn, but not for reasons that she had assumed. So I believe that in the same token, Kylo's vision of Rey's past isn't the full story of Rey's past.
Right.
The people that dropped her off on Jakku were not necessarily the same people that were her parents.
Right. There's definitely more to the story.
So yeah, that's where I'm getting at. Like I think there's more to her story that would possibly explain her affinity with the Force. Because while I don't mind her being a nobody, I think that it is more easily digested if she has that connection somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I had said earlier that I was okay with her just being strong in the Force, and I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a lot easier to swallow if she does have some type of connection like that.
Sure. And I think from a certain point of view, just like with Obi-Wan's explanation of Luke's father, being Anakin and Darth Vader basically, murdering his father, being a truth from a certain point of view. I think maybe the truth Kylo gives Rey in The Last Jedi about her parents, from a certain point of view, there might be truth to it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think there's definitely more to that story that's going to be uncovered. And I think it will definitely be explained why Rey is so powerful in the Force. And I think, again, JJ saying it's no accident is very telling. And, my theory for a little while, and I'm sure we'll dive into this when we do our episode 9 theories,
Mm-hmm.
a prevailing theory that I kind of like is her, being maybe some type of creation or clone from Luke's hand or something like that. So she actually in some way is actually a Skywalker.
Yeah.
And that's just one theory that I kind of like. But whether that's true or not, I think that we're going to get more. And personally, I've never had an issue with Rey being powerful. Like, I've always been upset about people calling Rey a Mary Sue, and just saying that she could just pick things up and do them. But for me, like, it wasn't too dissimilar from Luke's journey, in where, in A New Hope, he has like a conversation with Obi-Wan that I wouldn't even really consider training. I mean, he does a little training with the remote.
Mm-hmm.
And then, he uses the Force to destroy the Death Star. So I don't think it's that big of a leap in my opinion. So I've always just kind of felt like it never bothered me that Rey was strong with the Force. And again, I don't think somebody necessarily has to go through a certain amount of training to be able to at least access the Force and feel a connection to it, if there's belief there, if there's a connection there. And I think there's one line in The Last Jedi that explains her power in the Force for me that is enough for me, and that is when Snoke says, "Darkness rises and light to meet it." And he kind of explains that the darkness that has risen from Snoke and from Kylo Ren, there has to be light to balance that out. And in the Force is always trying to balance itself. So Luke shut himself off from the Force. So Snoke thought it would be Luke that would balance out the Force, but it actually had to be Rey. It had to be Rey for some reason. And I think that's why she's so powerful, is because she was basically chosen by the Force, in my opinion, and is balancing it out. So for me, I think it makes complete sense. And I've always just been a little bit grumpy about people, having an issue with Rey or calling her a Mary Sue. And for me, I kind of think about even recently in the Mandalorian with Baby Yoda, and how obviously Baby Yoda hasn't been trained in the Force, but he was able to, use the Force to stop the Mudhorn from killing the Mandalorian. So I think, it's clear in different forms of storytelling that you can use the Force without having training. So that's just my little point of view for this week on that. It's been on my mind.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from there. Like, I don't think that Rey is disconnected from this whole story as we've been led to believe. I think that there's some type of connection there. I don't know what that is yet. I have a couple ideas, a couple theories, and like I said, maybe we'll save that for later.
Yeah, we'll dive into our theories,
but
in the near future.
But yeah, and especially JJ saying that it's no accident. I mean, that has to mean something, I guess. So.
Yeah, and I can't wait to figure out what that reason is. So.
Yeah.
December 20th can't come soon enough.
Indeed. Okay, well, I think we're going to head up to our wrap-up segment.
Indeed, let's do it.
I'm just glad you're here. At the end.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for episode 4. We had a quick little point of view section there, but a lot of fun to talk about Rey. And then we had a lot of reviews again to get through this week. There's just been so much to talk about with reviews the last 2 weeks. Not complaining, it's a lot of fun. But those sections are probably going to be a little bit longer for the next couple weeks at least. So remember, again, to check out the website from a certain point of view.com. We had a new blog post this week. That was from me. I talked a little bit about where Star Wars has been and where it's going. So make sure if you haven't read that, check it out. That was one that kind of really came from my heart, I guess. So I would appreciate if you check that one out. Also, remember to, if you're subscribing in iTunes, leave us a review there. That helps a lot. Anywhere that you're subscribing to the show that you can leave a review, those types of things really help. More than you can imagine, really. So we would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Show. And remember, we are also on Facebook. You can find our page there from a certain point of view. We're sharing some articles and some fun things in Star Wars there, so you can join the discussion there. We're also on Twitter. We are at Certain POV Pod. That's Certain POV and then POD. So you can talk to us there. And then also our Discord channel. We've been having a heck of a lot of conversation in our Discord channel.
Yeah, some great conversations happening over there at Discord, so check it out.
Yeah, and you can find the link to that in our show notes, and it's also on the website as well. So wherever you're at, make sure you find us and connect with us. We'd love to talk to you about anything Star Wars. All things Star Wars. There's so much to talk about. So whatever you might be interested in across games, books, comics, movies, all of it. Theories, spoilers, there's going to be a place for you to talk. So we hope to see you there soon. And we'll talk to you all next week.
And remember, the Force will be with you.
Always.